What's going on, everybody? We're back with another episode of the Factory Tour. He's back. He being Matt Ward, second ever guest on this show. Such a long time ago, way back in April, before the NFL draft, before so many things. Our world was entirely different. But
Yeah.
Matt is the he is the lead writer and director of content at Broto Fantasy. I've been itching to have him back on. We had a great discussion the first time. We're going to touch on some of those same topics again today. Before we do, Matt, how are you feeling tonight?
Good, man. I'm really excited. I've been following along like basically every week, every episode, watching your lives and everything. So I'm excited to be back on. This has become one of my favorite little guilty pleasure shows for sure, because I don't have much time to dive into the podcast world as far as consumption of content. So this has been one of the ones that I've been excited to keep up with for sure.
Well, that means a whole lot to me. I really, I respect your work in the space, and so it means a lot if you're listening. And now you're here, so you get to listen to yourself in a couple of
Yeah, no,
days
I'm
when this
excited.
comes
I
out,
might not
right?
listen back to this one because I'm a little nervous, but I'm really excited to be
Oh,
here.
please, no need to be nervous. We're gonna jump into some news. We have some news that's not just beat report hype. We have some concrete money being thrown around. Finally, some of these running back shoes have dropped. We have Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook both being signed to spots they were rumored to sign in. It actually did pan out. So we have Ezekiel Elliott signing with the Patriots and Dalvin Cook signing with the Jets, both going to the AFC East. And I have my thoughts on how these backfields are going to play out. But honestly, I'd love to just kick it to you first. Let's start with the Patriots, because I think that situation's maybe a little bit less interesting, at least to me. So, how do you see things shaking out now that Ezekiel Elliott is a New England Patriot?
Well, I think it was kind of rumored, and part of the reason that he was going to go there is that, like, the Patriots obviously needed more of a goal line back and a guy in between the tackles for short yardage situations. Ramondre Stevenson being one of the more efficient backs everywhere else in the field, but seemingly falling apart inside of the five. And Zeke, even in his old age, obviously still putting up 12 touchdowns, all or 10 of which come inside the 5 yard line. So Zeke certainly is going to bolster that. You could see him doing some Jamal Williams-esque
Mm,
vulturing of Ramondre Stevenson's touchdown ceiling. But I don't think this moves the needle for Ramondre as much as it does for the other running back that we will inevitably talk about in the AFC East here.
yeah.
Zeke has long been an inefficient plotter and obviously a guy that had incredible per touch efficiency numbers, and Tony Pollard was able to overthrow him in his lifelong backfield and still put up serviceable weekly ceilings and high output ceilings, even when Zeke was healthy and on the field when they shared the field. So I do feel it's kind of, you're still going to see maybe like a 65-35 split, and that 35 in Zeke's favor is going to be a lot of useless low value touches.
Right. No, I agree with that take. The goal line stuff is really the only question. And I'm not even convinced that he's going to get a designated role there, because the Patriots didn't do that last year. They sort of just rotated Harris and Ramondre series is and who knows if Ramondre is actually bad at it, or if it's just like sample variance. I don't know for sure. He's a big guy. You'd think he could handle his goal line work, but either way, there were plenty of running back touches in this backfield that Ramondre Stevenson wasn't going to get. Somebody was going to get them, whether it's Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris. Those guys are effectively phased out at this point, and now it's Ezekiel Elliott. But I don't think that this affects Ramondre's. So I don't think it affects his ceiling outcome at all. And I
Right.
think, like you said, it could affect the median outcome a little bit if we do see Zeke mix in for some goal line, even if he's not the exclusive goal line back. He could be on the field when they get there, and then they leave him in. And like you said, Jamal Williams, he scored 18 touchdowns last year, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that Zeke could do something like that. But yeah, the ceiling case is unchanged, and I'm going to make the same argument for Brees Hall. But basically, when we draft a player, especially running backs, we're thinking like, okay, how does this go right for the player? What's the best possible outcome? And most of the time, that's what we're shooting for, because that's what's going to propel you to a championship. And the best case scenario for Ramondre Stevenson is still playing, a high volume role, being a workhorse based on his talent. And his talent is not changed due to this signing. So whatever ceiling he possessed before is not changed because they brought in Ezekiel Elliott. If he has
Right.
the ability to dominate this role, take the goal line, take all the passing work, he's still going to do that. And so maybe you move him down a couple of spots in whatever redraft rankings you might have. but this has very little impact on his dynasty ranking for me.
Yeah, yeah, I agree in that sense, especially from a long-term outcome. Like Ramondre was, like I've got the numbers right here, but Ramondre was a little inefficient when it came to like those goal line carries. Again, just a
Mhm.
9.3% conversion percentage, whereas Zeke had a 30.7% conversion percentage. And obviously, I don't think Bill Belichick would ever admit that he's in a rebuild at any year. So it's more so just like a real life football move. And I don't think that, Zeke didn't negatively affect Tony Pollard. And I think Ramondre Stevenson is a very similar style player, especially when it comes to explosive run percentage and, big playability. So,
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that is a big difference in terms of the conversion percentage, and so I think there's some validity to that idea. I don't see how the Pats could be in a rebuilding window. I mean, they have Devontae Parker, Juju Smith-Schuster, they have Mac Jones. I mean, I don't know. This seems like a
yeah.
Super Bowl contender to me.
In the AFC East
It's
at that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's like I kind of hope the Latavius Murray smoke is real so that all
Me
of these
too.
backfields in the AFC East can all be featuring like a 30-year-old washed up no, nothing. Because like we have Jeff Wilson, we have Ezekiel Elliott, we have Dalvin Cook. I just think it would be fun to have
Raheem.
Latavius Murray, also Raheem Mostert. It might be a little disrespectful to put Dalvin Cook into that group, and maybe we can talk about him now. Um, I don't think he's as washed up as Zeke. Like he hasn't been quite as bad over the past 2 years. There's some idea that he was limited by a shoulder injury, but definitely has been more inefficient over the past 2 seasons. Has not been even an above average rusher, despite the box scores, despite the counting stats. So he goes and signs in New York. Brees Hall obviously coming off the ACL, but similar to the Patriots, there was really nothing behind him, right? They had Michael Carter, who's proved to be a pretty uninspiring backup. They had Zonovan Knight, who had like one or two interesting games and then fell off an efficiency cliff. And then they drafted Izzy Abanikanda in the 5th round, who is like super raw prospect. I think he's 20 years old. So they really
Yeah.
had nothing behind Brees Hall. They're all in with Aaron Rodgers for this year. I think this move makes sense in that sense where, Hall is not guaranteed to be himself or to be fully healthy this year. So it makes sense to get some insurance with Dalvin Cook. Do you think there's more to that? How do you see this backfield shaping up, specifically early in the year, as Hall is maybe getting eased back in?
Yeah, obviously there's a little bit of a higher value assumption when it comes to Brees Hall over Ramondre Stevenson, but this is and essentially what I meant with it moves the needle a little bit more. Brees Hall was officially removed from the physically unable to perform list today. He's going to be involved in some preseason and obviously for the rest of training camp, which is great. That's good news. Like you could see him play
Mhm.
and suit up as early as week 1, but I also think that's a very obvious signing that's saying he's not going to get the workload that's leading to Brees Hall being the RB2 dynasty and the fifth or sixth running back taken off the board in redraft leagues. That volume is probably going to come much later in the season than we all want. And
Mhm.
again, Dalvin Cook, as far as like being as washed as Zeke, no, but you nailed it, and I won't beat a dead horse. And it also comes with Aaron Rodgers renegotiating his contract, but doing it quite late in the offseason where there weren't very many viable offensive free agents available.
Yeah.
So this is really just a good faith signing from the Jets to Aaron Rodgers. It's a 1-year contract with basically most of the salary cap space that Aaron Rodgers decided to reallocate being allocated to Dalvin Cook. So it's a signing that makes sense for that team. Again, there's not much depth there, and it's certainly, in my opinion, was the best available veteran as far as all of these veteran free agents that were looking for homes: Zeke, Kareem Hunt, Fournette, and rounding out with Cook.
Mhm.
It's also a position where he's probably going to see 200 220 touches this season, but I don't think it necessarily should remove or move people off the fact that Brees Hall is still a top 3 dynasty running back, and he's going to come back at some point in this season and perform and remind you all why.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that. I think you made a really great point about the late signing, because the money does kind of impact the way people look at this, right? Because he didn't sign for pennies on the dollar. He did get a pretty sizable chunk of change, but as you pointed out, there's no one else to sign. Like this is a 1-year deal. The cap hit is only for this year. Their money isn't put aside for anything else, so it doesn't really matter the same way it would if they had signed him to that kind of money in March.
Right.
And that is something we need to remember. But yeah, like I said with Ramondre, I don't think this impacts the ceiling for Hall. If he is that guy, if he's the guy he looked like early last season before he tore his ACL, especially by late in the season, he absolutely can monopolize this backfield, get the high value touches. There are already beat reporters, or at least one I saw, saying this is Hall's backfield. As soon as he's fully
as it
healthy,
should
he's
be.
the bell cow. We just don't know exactly when that will be, but it's been all good signs so far. So certainly there is a possibility of re-injury with ACLs, or even like a slow start. We saw with J.K. Dobbins last year, but that's not a guarantee. And in the scenario where you're drafting Brees Hall, you're already banking on the ceiling outcome. Like if you draft Brees Hall in the third round and he is limited by his ACL, gets re-injured, whatever, you're done whether or not Dalvin Cook is on the Jets or not. Like it doesn't change the thesis of the pick. So for me, this is another situation where it impacts the median outcome for this year, but it doesn't impact what I think is the ultimate upside, and it doesn't move him for me in Dynasty. I still have him as my RB2. Really, the only guy I'd consider alongside him is Jahmyr Gibbs, who hasn't yet proven to be as good as Brees Hall, and also has a running mate in David Montgomery, who's pretty similar to Dalvin Cook. So, yeah, for me, this isn't a huge deal. It seemed like kind of an inevitability, and that's where I'm at with Hall. Now, looking at the two backs that were signed specifically in Dynasty, do you have any interest in picking up either of these guys?
No, and conversely, I was kind of just going to piggyback on that. Like, I don't think it moves the ceiling much for the guys that they're joining in the younger dynasty prospects that we enjoy in Ramondre and Brees Hall. And I don't think it does anything for their value either. Like, I
Mhm.
don't think people should be running to, increase the value of either one of these guys on the draft boards. Like, still in that RB 40 to 50 range is fine by me, sort of thing for a guy like Zeke. Obviously, Dalvin Cook a little bit higher, but I really think that both of those guys, for one, are in that range of players that their production value does not matter whatsoever when it comes to reaccruing value on the trade market. Like they could
Mhm.
put up 18 points per game and you're not going to get more than a second.
Yeah.
So, right. So, with both of those guys, and again, I'll kind of retrocede a little bit. It's like if we assumed that Brees Hall is good enough to be Brees Hall and that Ramondre Stevenson is good enough to be Ramondre, then these two like pillars of dying running backs are
Mm.
not going to get in the way. And it's also kind of goes to like the whole money standpoint of like the Vikings felt it more pertinent to start Alexander Madison and cut Dalvin Cook with a dead cap hit than to keep him on the team. So like, do you think Madison's more talented than Brees Hall?
I do not. I
Yeah,
don't
that's
think
kind of my
that's
thing. It shouldn't
a
move the needle
yeah.
much at all. It just for that early start of season production for Brees Hall, and I think even less for Ramondre.
Yeah, totally agree there. I think these guys are going to get chased up the board in Dynasty and redraft much higher than I'm willing to pay the price.
Yeah,
I had a little bit of Cook in best ball. Um, I don't think I'll be getting any more because I expect he's going to jump a lot more than I'd like to see. The market seems to react to just any kinds of situational certainty with positive feedback. If he could get signed anywhere and he would go up in
yeah,
ADP. So I'm
exactly.
kind of done drafting him. Zeke, I wasn't drafting. I'm still not drafting. His best case scenario is like 400 rushing yards and like 5 touchdowns. Like I really don't see any way that he's going to get enough volume to do more than that. He's not going to get pass down work. I don't really even think he has that much contingent value if Ramondre were to get hurt.
I
I think
agree.
they would just mix in Pierre Strong, who's much more explosive, and they'd mix in these other guys. They'd bring back Ty Montgomery from wherever he's being cryogenically
Yeah,
frozen at the time. Um, with Dalvin, I do think there's more contingent value because I think this will be a good offense. And I think the other backs there are just sort of unproven. Like if Hall does get re-injured early in the season, knock on wood, I think Cook could definitely have a significant workload for the year,
yes,
and he could definitely finish as like a high end RB2. That would not surprise me because I think he has a little bit left in the tank. Rodgers is going to want him out there. That's a scenario that I can see, but not someone I'm eager to trade for in Dynasty, where I think after this year, he's totally dust and could be dust as soon as, week 5. I guess I don't see a difference really between Dalvin Cook and like Samaje Perine. Like
yeah,
pretty much the same. You're both backing up a running back coming off an ACL. Neither of you have very much juice. You're all sort of just, you're all purpose competent and not really excelling at anything at this point. So that's sort of the bucket that I'd put him in. maybe
Yeah,
slightly.
I think that's a fair range of outcomes as well, because for the exact same situation, like Samaje could definitely give you an RB 15 point per game season if Javante can't suit up for all 17 and he's,
Mhm.
handed a Sean Payton
Yeah.
monster workload.
Yep. So that's really where we're at. It sounds like we're both still pretty bullish on Hall and Ramondre. I still
Yeah,
prefer
I'm
Ramondre
legitimately
to
not really adjusting my rankings on either one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So I still prefer Ramondre and Dynasty to guys like Najee Harris,
Yes.
Damian Pierce, Derrick Henry. I'm still taking him over those guys. So I don't think this should move the needle very much.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's RB12.
Perfect. All right. That's great. We got the news handled. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to circle back a little bit to what we talked about in our very first show together, which was this rookie running back class. And at the time, these guys were not wearing NFL jerseys. They were just prospects. We didn't know the draft capital, we didn't know the landing spot. And we said some stuff that ended up not being very accurate,
Yeah.
as that tends to go with the running back position. We did not know exactly where these guys were going to go. Some of them were wildly different than we expected. So I'm just going to work my way through here. There's not really any particular order to this list, but we talked a lot about 6 different guys. Actually, 5 of them. One of them, I don't think we talked about Kendra Miller much when you were on, but he ended up going to your Saints, so we should talk about him too. I'll
For
throw
sure.
him in at the end. Let's start with the new kid on the block, or the new hotness, I should say, which is Tank Bigsby. Everybody seems to have a take on Tank. He was my most drafted rookie, even though I initially didn't really like the landing spot. I loved his ADP and rookie drafts. He was going like 209, 210, 211. It was just like really easy to pick him there, because we both liked him as a prospect. Like we said, he had kind of all those skills that you want to see. He had requisite size, he had production, he had pass catching ability. Not a guy that necessarily blows you away at all those things, but certainly competent, kind of like a young Samaje Perine. Um, a guy who can handle the work if you give him the work.
Samaje was a pretty good prospect, in all
Yeah,
honesty.
he was. He just went in the fourth round instead of the third round. So
Yeah.
yeah, so honestly, not bad company at all. But there's talk now that he could eat into Travis Etienne's workload and that he played a short yardage snap in a preseason game. So what are you doing with Tank Bigsby at this point?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely looks the part. Like as far as size too, coming in at 6 foot and 210, he looks bigger than ETN, even though there says that there's a size discrepancy as far as their draft measurables are. He definitely looks bigger, and again, part of those positives are that true freshman breakout and having an incredible amount of yards after contact and great contact balance and all of those things. So those short yardage snaps are where people think he's going to get a lot of utility and certainly could eat in Travis Etienne's workload. But
Mhm.
drafted third round, pick 25, obviously to the Jaguars. That's kind of where we thought he was going to go. One of the ones that we did get right was towards the end of that mid third round.
Mhm.
And I really like Bigsby. This rounds out a prospect profile that you already have to add some nuance to in those red flags with 2 coaching changes, like a complete offensive overhaul happening as well. Quarterback transferring out, right, going to Oregon. So like a lot of things were shifting in that Auburn offense, and he still put up incredible market shares. Just was not overly. There was
Not
not much
overly
progression.
efficient.
Yeah, and not overly efficient, right? And not much progression from that freshman season. Like it didn't really grow the way you like to see a guy that's coming out in his third year put up a better season in his junior or a better season in his sophomore, a better season in his junior. That's obviously what you'd like to see, but Tank landing with the Jaguars, I think that if that offense continues to progress the way that it is, already putting up a top 10 season last season, the addition of Calvin Ridley, if he gets some of that short yardage work, like there's going to be some value there. And as we've seen too, like obviously Travis Etienne was a first round draft pick, so they'll have the 5th-year option, but he is a part of the old regime. And not that I think that they would necessarily walk from that, but we'll get into probably a little bit further how the running back market is falling apart in the NFL. And obviously, Bigsby is a little cheaper and has a longer contract now. So there
Yeah.
could be a turnaround there where he's the main guy.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, with the running back market the way it is, you really can't rule out any possibilities. And even just the fragility of running backs themselves. Like we don't know, obviously hoping, nothing like this, but I mean, ETN could suffer another devastating injury like he did in his rookie year. You never know with this stuff. So it's important to identify who the backs we think are talented are and start there. And then kind of work our way backwards into like, okay, how does this pay off? And there are ways that it pays off with Bigsby, which is why I've been drafting him a lot. I have a lot of him on underdog too. I just think he has a really good price for a guy that I think has all of that contingent upside of 3 down back, where he can handle short yardage and he can handle passing downs, with also some possibility of a standalone role, at least some spike weeks in there if he does score touchdowns. I do think any of the ETN talk is sort of overblown, at least at this stage, where like I think Travis Etienne's very good. Everything he did last year shows that he's very good. Maybe not quite the transcendent pass catcher that we hoped, but as a rusher, very good. I know he wasn't super efficient like towards the end zone, but again, I don't know if that's predictive or if that's just sort of random variance. They did have a bad O line. So I don't necessarily think it's likely that ETN is losing out on a lot of work. Again, it's like with the Zeke signing, there were touches that were going to go to somebody because no running back's getting 95% of the touches anymore. It doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Somebody's going to get 30% of the work. The good news with Tank is that it looks locked in like he's that guy. Like he is the second guy. There's no Dearness Johnson, Jermichael Hasty talk as like the backup. He is the clear backup. That's a green flag for him. So anything on top is sort of just extra for me at where he's priced right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also just I think that an offense like an offense like this, every offense in the NFL, you kind of touched on it a little bit. Like it's just you're not going to see workhorse opportunity shares. Like it's going to become a misnomer soon, and not in the way that we saw them in the past anyway, because that also leads to the market then being able to shift again where running backs can demand that money. And there seems to be a very strong flag plant that general managers in the NFL do not want that to happen.
Yeah. I mean, there's just an abundance of talent at the position and only one plays on the field at a time. Like there's a lot of things working against the running backs right now. And it's leading to more and more of these split backfields and committees and segmented roles. I mean, Elijah Mitchell and Christian McCaffrey had the same number of carries in games that they both played last year. So that's just
That's a crazy stat.
it's just how it works, you know.
Yeah.
Some of that had to do with blowouts and stuff where they were resting McCaffrey. But either way, Bigsby can get work. He can have even some standalone value, and ETN can still pay off at his cost, which is falling. Honestly, I mean, I've been able to get him in the 5th round in certain best ball drafts. He's falling into that low end RB1 range in Dynasty. His cost is not prohibitive. I can talk myself into both guys, but I do like Tank Bigsby, and it has been all good news for him so far. He's rising on Keep Trade Cut. He's found himself ahead of Brian Robinson, ahead of AJ Dillon, ahead of Khalil Herbert. How do you feel about him and sort of that company?
Yeah, I think that that's rightfully valued as well. I wouldn't raise him much higher because then you're starting to get into that other tier of kind of like maybe veteran or overlooked producers like the Madisons, the Rashad Whites,
Mhm.
that tier.
Guys we
So
know that are going to score points.
exactly. But right around there, I would, even though Brian Robinson is viewed as a starter, that's absolutely I would take the shot on the upside swing of Tank there.
Yeah, it feels about right to me. I'm worried that he could jump the shark a little bit, although I don't need to be worried. He's like my most exposed running back. I guess I
Yeah,
should be I should be hoping that his value
yeah,
jumps the
absolutely.
shark sometime soon, and then I can trade some shares and get some other shiny toys. But yeah, he's certainly, of all the running backs we talked about the first time around, he has really maneuvered himself, amongst the best of them to find himself in a good offense, to find himself getting all the good reports. Another player getting good reports, also in a good situation, is Devin Achane. I still don't know how to say his name. I'm going to say it that way today.
On.
Devon
I think it's
Achane, Devin
Devon now.
Achane. He has an apostrophe that sort of appeared out of nowhere in his first
Yeah,
name.
I
And
know. That's what I mean. That's why I said I think it's Devon now.
one day I saw that apostrophe and I thought it was like a Mandela effect where it was always there and I just didn't remember it being there, but I'm pretty sure
Same.
it wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Devon, whatever, the guy who runs fast for the Miami Dolphins.
Super fast.
Yeah, I think we mentioned the Dolphins as like the perfect landing spot for him in the show that we did together, and it
Yeah.
certainly worked out that way. He's there now with Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson. Not super imposing competition in my mind. So he has been getting all the positive buzz in camp. He did play behind Myles Gaskin and Salvon Ahmed in preseason week 1. I don't really make anything out of that. I think there's just a lot of teams where that's the way. If you're the new guy, you come in later. I tend to pay attention to these practice reports where every day it's like, oh my gosh, they love Devin Akane. He made this catch. He did this thing.
Yeah.
I'm very high on him. How do you feel since we last spoke about him?
Yeah, I mean, right landing spot, but I was admittedly incredibly wrong about his draft capital projections. But round 3, pick 21, I thought, maybe into round 4, day 3 for sure. But part of that reason is he's 5'8" and a half, 188 pounds. But
Yep.
it's also worth noting that he's never had an entire offseason to train football because he's always trained track. And now he can actually put on football weight, apparently already up to like 195 before offseason begins, which is good. Like that's going to increase that BMI. That's going to keep that speed score still around that 97th percentile, maybe not 99th. But yeah, like he's an 88th percentile weight adjusted speed score despite being 5'8" and 188. Forced 53 missed tackles on 196 attempts. Pretty elite rushing grade from PFF during his final season. Had 43 rushing attempts over 20 yards during his 3 years in the SEC. Like the kid is fast. And in Mike McDaniel's offense is probably the most exciting spot for Devon Achane because of how Mike McDaniel's is able to utilize speed, yards after the catch, open field blocking schemes, downfield blocking schemes. Obviously, I think the biggest questions with Miami is going to be their offensive line, keeping Tua healthy, things of that nature. But also, Devon Achane is like low-key the biggest winner of all these free agent signings because now it's just, Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert in front of him. Ezekiel Elliott is elsewhere. Dalvin Cook, who is rumored to go to Miami with New York Jets. So, yeah, I mean, him falling into the third round, rounding out his already slightly impressive analytic profile with third round draft capital ahead of Tank is pretty positive upside for a guy that for guys in general that usually don't get drafted that early at that size.
Yeah. He was such a unique prospect because he did things that those guys of that size just don't typically do. Like he did handle that workhorse role. He stole Isaiah Spiller's lunch money at Texas A&M, who still went in the 4th round. So like legitimate competition. Like you think of how many running backs in college football don't even get drafted. Like we can make fun of Isaiah Spiller. He still got legitimate draft capital in the NFL.
Yeah.
So for a chain to really marginalize him is not nothing. That's significant. And then after Spiller was gone, I mean, he just went absolutely insane. He's being valued currently on Keep Trade Cut as the RB26. He's actually, I don't know how reactive this is to the Cook signing. He's currently ahead of Alexander Mattison, Joe Mixon, Isaiah Pacheco. I would take him ahead of those guys. I don't know if you would, but maybe you can chime in on his value. Have you found his value to be palatable?
Yeah, I think that is palatable. I'd probably lean Madison or Mixon in a more competitive build for sure, because I do think that there's a little bit more inherent risk for that year 1 upside that obviously after that you don't really see incredible breakouts for running backs. You need to see linear production from rookie to sophomore seasons. So I obviously think Mixon's still in line for a monster touch share, opportunity share. I think Alexander Madison is going to put up some decent points, but Isaiah Pacheco and a guy like Devon Achane are really similar assets to me, and I would definitely prefer Achane in that sense because I think the upside is certainly higher and obviously a little bit more job security on a place like, and yes, the Chiefs is just Jerick McKinnon, but as far as value is concerned, I think Miami's invested in this kid and speak very highly of him.
Yeah, more invested from a draft capital standpoint. He's also a
Yes.
rookie as opposed to a second-year player, so there's more value insulation in that respect. And the chain is a pass catcher, and Pacheco is not. So that's certainly a good argument for the ceiling. So I think he's pretty valued pretty closely to where he should be. There's definitely some names at other positions that I don't agree with, but Keep Trade Cut's very, it's very reactionary. It's very volatile.
Yes,
I would,
that's
I
the right
would,
word.
I wouldn't take him over Pat Fryermuth, and and I wouldn't take him. I don't think he should be valued as closely to someone like, I don't know, Geno Smith or whatever. But it's hard to evaluate across positions in terms of running backs. I think he's pretty much right there in that mid-range RB2 discussion. Probably isn't going to be a league winner as a rookie. He might never be a league winner, but he certainly has potential to carve out a role that's makes him kind of an outlier for his size. I'm willing to take the shot on him being an outlier at that price. I guess I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and that kind of plays into that philosophy that we were talking about in episode 2 when you and I were hanging out, is that there's no such thing as a perfect prospect, but there are really good bets or perfect bets at cost. And a chain
Mhm.
falling to mid-second in rookie drafts and in RB24 around RB25 overall in startup drafts, like that's a good bet on an outlier.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely the kind of bet you want to make. What's interesting is that in rookie drafts, I felt like it was Devin Achane and it was Zach Charbonnet kind of going back to back. Sometimes one would go first, sometimes the other would go first. But since then, Charbonnet has really risen, where Achane has stayed pretty stagnant. I don't know if that's just because of Dalvin Cook rumors or maybe Zach Charbonnet. I don't know. I don't know what it's for, but let me just go ahead and pull up the value here because Charbonnet is valued all the way up at RB18 recently, and that's even with his indefinite injury that turned out to be 2 days. So the market is definitely high on him. I understand why to some extent, which is that he does have that workhorse size. He has the 3 down skill set, caught passes at UCLA. I'm intrigued in his upside, but at the same time, like we just said, Devin Achane is in the perfect situation competing with Mostert and Jeff Wilson. Zach Charbonnet is competing with Kenneth Walker. Like he's a second year back, had a good rookie season, certainly a flawed player, but a very talented player in certain regards. And he's not going anywhere. Like I don't think Kenneth Walker is very likely to become nothing in the NFL. I think he's going to sustain a role because he does some things really well. He's very explosive. He makes big plays. And so it's kind of hard for me to picture the ceiling for Charbonnet without an injury. I don't really get why he would be valued so much higher than Achane. He's actually valued ahead of J.K. Dobbins, Rashad White right now. So that's tricky for me. Where are you at with Charbonnet lately?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how these rookie values have played out post draft and as preseason shakes out because they were essentially valued in an exclusive tier back to back as rookies. Shane and Charbonnet were, and like I get it as well. A little bit of higher draft capital, round 2, pick 21 of the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker has a little bit higher draft capital than him as well, but 6 foot around 218 to 220 when playing time comes in. So yeah, he's a big guy and he's got a lot of yards after the contact. Had led the NCAA in scrimmage yards per game at 168.0 during his final season. Actually made a good business decision to go back during the 4th year, which normally isn't the best decision for running back prospects specifically that have, kind of some buzz as a 3-year player, even though they didn't
Mhm.
have the most production, a la a guy like Chuba Hubbard. But
Yeah.
Charbonnet really exploded it in his final season at UCLA and got some decent draft capital to solidify what was an impressive freshman breakout and an impressive senior season. Now, again, it's hard to predict that ceiling to be what his profile says it should be without an injury to Kenneth Walker. And I think both of these guys are just good enough and just NFL valuable enough. There's the word.
Mhm.
Like that they're going to vulture each other. Like what
Yeah.
Charbonnet brings to the table are all the things that Kenneth Walker doesn't. Namely, something that doesn't even show up on fantasy box scores, of course, but Charbonnet may very well be the best pass blocking running back of the 2023 NFL draft class.
Mm.
And them drafting JSN so high, although they didn't run many 3 wide receiver sets last season, tells me that they actually want to pass more, with Charbonnet being their 2nd round draft pick as well, almost as, that anchor on 3rd down for blitz pickups. So that is what really might hurt Kenneth Walker more, is an entire philosophy change where we
Yeah.
saw obviously them open up the offense with Geno Smith, something they refused to do in a decade with Russell Wilson. That said, Kenneth Walker is still kind of the back that I favor here because of that explosivity,
Mm.
because of that pure single play upside, where Charbonnet really needs to chip away at a massive opportunity share, I think, for him to hit his ceiling.
Yeah, that's a great point. Geno Smith was what the Seahawks needed all these years to unlock the passing game.
Which is wild, but
Nothing makes
yeah,
any sense. Nothing makes any sense, but you're absolutely right. I mean, they have made moves that suggest more of a pass heavy approach. They should be more pass heavy with the 3 wide receivers that they have. Obvious, like anything short of that would just be shooting themselves in the foot. Like
exactly.
every snap that Noah Fant and Will Dissly are both on the field together, putting Lockett or JSN on the bench is just like mind-numbingly stupid, in my opinion. So that's what they should be doing. It's probably the way they're going to go when your 3rd wide receiver becomes Jackson Smith and Jigba instead of Dwayne Eskridge or whoever the heck it was last year. It's easy to make that swap.
Marquise
And
Goodwin,
I already didn't expect Walker to get a lot of 3rd down work. They used like DJ Dallas in that role
Allison,
last year, Travis
Tony
Homer.
Jones at some
Those
random
guys
point.
are those guys are nobodies. Like those guys are not they're NPCs basically. I mean, they
Yeah,
occupy
they're
space.
literally like,
Charbonnet is talented. Like you said, he's good at not only the pass blocking, but he's capable as a receiver. He can handle carries. Like he's a guy you can put on the field and not tip your hand at what you're going to do. Whereas with
right.
Kenneth Walker, it's like if he's on the field, they're probably going to want to use him on a run play. He ran a lot of empty calorie routes last year. Um, Not to say that he doesn't have hands. I know that was like the thing people were talking about last year. Like, what do you mean he can't catch? Look, he has two hands right there at the end of his arms. He does have hands, but he's not a guy that we expect to be utilized as a pass catcher. So I do see Charbonnet more. I see Charbonnet more as like he's a thorn in the side of Walker. I don't necessarily see it in terms of like a managed season long format where I'm like really excited to draft him that highly. I like him in best ball where he's going more in that like RB3 range because then it's like, okay, he gives me a couple of big weeks. I have the potential that he becomes the workhorse if there's an injury. But I don't know. In Dynasty, where I'm managing my team, that's a high price to pay for a guy that doesn't really have that every down potential.
Yeah, and again, like Charbonnet is somebody that I think he doesn't have that same explosivity. So the kind of like weekly handcuff upside that somebody like Kenneth Walker in his role or a Tony Pollard would have is non-existent for Charbonnet to me. I really do think the guy needs the 3 down workload, but
Yep.
as you said, it's more of a thorn in the side of Kenneth Walker for sure, because it's also the Seahawks like openly telling us that they still don't really trust Kenneth Walker on 3rd down.
Right. And I mean, he didn't have a very good success rate last year. I guess you mean 3rd down in terms of pass blocking, which is also valid.
Yes.
He's not super reliable in a lot of ways. He's exciting and he is explosive, but he's not super reliable. So Charbonnet is kind of the perfect complement there. I don't think they should have spent a 2nd round pick on him, but in terms of backs they
It's
could have
very high.
drafted, he is a good complement to Walker's skill set. I'll give them that. Just to clear the air a little bit, I did check the ADP on Bulletproof to make sure that the Charbonnet value wasn't actually that high. It looks like it's not. He's only going about 8 spots ahead of a chain in startup drafts, and he's
I
going like,
think that's more
yeah,
palatable.
yeah, he's going right ahead of Madison, James Cook, Pacheco. He's going after Aaron Jones, Rashad White, Cam Akers. On KTC, he's ahead of J.K. Dobbins, and I was like about to like fight somebody. I don't know who, like Mr. Keep Trade Cut or something. I was gonna have to fight him because
At
that's
Mr.
crazy.
KTC.
Yeah, I know he's not the one who does the values, but the point remains that would have been ludicrous. That's RB25 price according to Bulletproof is a lot more palatable. I'm pretty interested there for the reasons that we've stated. Moving on to some guys that are maybe not getting the good vibes. We will
Yeah.
start with Zach Evans, somebody who we talked pretty favorably about in this show. We admitted that there were some warts on his profile and nothing was guaranteed with him. But we didn't think he was going to fall all the way to round 6. And since he fell to round 6, things really haven't gotten any better for him. He was drafted to the Los Angeles Rams. It was like, okay, there's nobody behind Cam Akers. Great. He can be the backup. Lately, we haven't heard anything about Zach Evans. So, like, there's really no reports that he's doing anything well, that he's getting a lot of work. It's not like Devin Achane. It's not like Tank Bigsby, where these guys are constantly, there's a drumbeat of just good vibes around them. Evans is reportedly behind Cam Akers, but also Kyron Williams, Ronnie Rivers, and Royce Freeman, who they signed like 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah, he's like the 5th string running back. Right
yeah,
now.
like he might not make the team. Like we there's really no guarantee he's even going to make the team. 6th rounders get cut all the time. So look, he wasn't expensive in rookie drafts. He was a 3rd round rookie pick. This happens to those players sometimes, but definitely an unfortunate development for a guy that we thought had a lot of potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, again, what we were talking about in the first time that we were hanging out here is draft capital really does define production and paths to volume. It's the single most predictive stat to predicting volume of rookie prospects, both at every single position. So guys like Evans and Tucker falling as far as they did, and further prospects that we were mentioning in short breaths going undrafted and things of that nature, are obviously like they are model killers. Like it doesn't matter how positive the 5-star recruit rating was or how the efficiency looked as a freshman. If the NFL is straight up telling you over and over again that this kid's potentially not even going to make the team, then it's a very, very, very short window in likelihood that player ever becomes fantasy relevant. Evans, of course, like showed some upside. Well, he was literally the number 1 rated high school recruit coming
Yeah.
in to TCU, but showed some upside through his years at the NCAA. But ultimately, kind of got overthrown by Kendre Miller, got overthrown by Quinshon Judkins. Like, never really had that workhorse role. And yes, it's not like Kyron Williams or Cam Akers or these guys are world beaters of talent. They are guys that can be beaten out in a
Mhm.
depth chart, but it seems highly unlikely that Zach Evans is going to do so.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of the Isaiah Spiller situation, to be honest, where we have this player who was thought very highly of in college football for several years. There's a lot of excitement about him. Some people have him ranked, as high as their RB3 pre-draft, and then the draft capital's not there, and then he can't even beat out the subpar backups that are there. So at this point with Zach Evans, like, you don't have to drop him in your dynasty leagues because who are you going to pick up? I mean, if you have a shallow bench, you can drop him. He's definitely not a must hold, but at this point, you're just hoping he can latch on to the team. I don't know. Is he a special teams guy at all?
No, not really.
No. So that's the tough thing. Like, if a rookie running back at least can contribute on special teams, they can make the 53-man roster. Like Isaiah Pacheco was the kick returner last year. That at least gets your foot in the door because there's only like 3 running backs dressed on game day. So if somebody
Right.
gets hurt, it's like very easy for you to find your way onto the field. And then you get on the field and you make a play, and it's like, oh, maybe he can play. But if you can't even get active on game days because you don't play special teams, it's like way harder for someone like Zach Evans to give himself any opportunity. So it's looking more than likely that it's over. Kyron Williams right now is kind of thought of as the backup. He's probably going to get the third down work. Uh, so it's just going to be
And was
Akers
always kind
and
of
Williams.
viewed as a third down change of pace running back, so he kind of seems
Yeah.
to have that role on lock ahead of Zach Evans as well.
Yeah. His apparent lack of athleticism does not matter. He can still
Still running
catch
his 40
a
to this
swing
day.
route, and he can probably, I don't know, maybe he's a good pass blocker. I don't keep up on that too much, but if they want to give him that role, he probably is doing it well. That's not in Zach Evans's bag, I would assume. So yeah, that's where we're at with him. Another player who's been disappointing is Sean Tucker. We talked about him as a potential third, fourth round pick. That was right around the time that the injury concerns came out, and clearly the injury concerns played a hand in him going undrafted. But since then, he has been cleared to play, and he's still thought to be behind like Keyshawn Vaughn, Chase Edmonds. So it wasn't necessarily just injury concerns that caused him to fall in the NFL draft. He's at this point in time not looking like some kind of secret star talent, despite his really impressive prospect profile. Do you think? I don't know. Do you think that there's any chance for Tucker to maybe beat out these guys? It didn't look good in preseason week 1, to be sure. I don't think he actually played, but I don't know. Maybe he'll have his opportunities at some point.
The Sean Tucker concerns, I guess, I mean, as you said, were very real and real enough for him to not be selected at all, which essentially defines his profile as a utility player at best. Unfortunate for a kid that was incredibly productive, but again, incredibly productive at Syracuse,
Yeah.
right? So the conference adjusted stats aren't as kind to a profile like Sean Tucker's, because if you go, how many yards was he averaging over the conference average against the same defenses, it kind of whittles that down a little bit. But you don't have to dive that deep into analytics to be able to pivot off of these players. Again, the NFL has kind of told us, the draft capital has told us, the preseason snaps have told us. Not that I get too much into preseason news, but when these rosters do get cut from the 75, 77 men rosters that they have down to 53, and those names are no longer standing on that list, that's obviously cause for concern. And when you start to hear the rumblings that he's, not even really a name that's breaking through the top 53 of said roster, then you can read between the lines a little bit more. Sean Tucker is always going to have Sean Tucker's profile in his back pocket. But again, the avenue to playing time is draft capital for running backs over anybody, but for any prospect, the avenue to playing time is draft capital, and he didn't get any.
Yes. He did not get any draft, literally zero draft capital. He went undrafted. Whatever the reason, he went undrafted. Now, the most recent news on NBC Sports Edge is a quote from Todd Bowles saying that Sean Tucker has a good chance to make the roster. So
That's good.
whether
That's
whether
good.
that matters, or whether that means anything or not, I don't know.
Well, if
They
he can't latch
certainly,
onto that roster, I like
yeah.
his upside as a, a potential handcuff, because a hot hand, Keyshawn Vaughn, Chase Edmonds, a hot hand could easily take over that offense from Rashad White should Rashad plunder or unfortunately get injured.
Yeah, absolutely agree there. It's like with Zach Evans, the competition is not steep.
Right.
Unlike Zach Evans, there's at least some positive news. There's at least some thought that he's going to make the team. If he makes the team, I would assume starting week 1, unless he does special teams. Again, I don't I don't know if he does special teams. I don't think that he does. I would assume Vaughn and Edmonds are active with Rashad White in week 1, and that Tucker's sort of their reserve inactive guy. But if one of those guys gets hurt, then he would be the next man up. He would be active on game day. So we just really want him to make the 53. That's the key with Tucker. And again, you can keep him stashed. The point I want to make about Evans and Tucker is not that it's that they were not necessarily the wrong picks in rookie drafts, even if this is the outcome for them. Like, it's not over by any means, but even if this is how it ends and they both get cut and they literally never play again, I don't think that they were bad picks in rookie drafts because, again, we're always making the bet on potential. It's not a bet that we expect to pay off when you're in the mid to late third, fourth round of rookie drafts.
Right.
It's about what do we get if it hits, right? And so, yeah, maybe
Exactly.
maybe Tank Dell makes the Houston Texans, and it's like, okay, well, he is on a roster and Zach Evans isn't. Sure, but what are the odds that Tank Dell ever provides something difference making in fantasy football, right? Maybe Aiden O'Connell is the backup quarterback in Las Vegas. What are the odds that he ever does anything in fantasy football?
You were
With
the
Tucker and
That's the
Evans,
exact name that I wanted to drop in that fourth round, because like that's the alternative, right?
yeah,
You're playing the exact same game. It just so happened to work out.
right. But even it working out, like it doesn't pay off for you just that these guys maybe
And it
make
doesn't make it a
teams.
better pick.
Yeah, exactly. You're betting on like not only what's the odds that this is going to pan out, but what do I get? Like what do I win, if this
Right.
pans out? And so like you don't need to beat yourself up because you didn't get the $5 scratch off ticket and instead of because you thought you could get the $100,000 one and you got nothing. Like it just doesn't matter. There's really no guys like looking at rookie draft ADP. There's basically nobody that you whiffed on at this point. Like somebody might emerge, but Tucker Kraft looks like he's firmly the backup. None of these wide receivers really, other than Puka Nakua, have gotten any kind of buzz. There's no back. None of these quarterbacks look like they're going to play. No word on Dwayne McBride. Darnell Washington's a backup. Like there's just nothing
Right.
here, and that's
No,
usually
and
what it looks like.
it's the risk to reward ratio. It's essentially like what are the odds of this hitting its ceiling of outcomes? And the odds on players that have positive profiles are obviously a little higher, and it costs the same amount of dynasty draft capital to
Mhm.
invest in those risk versus reward upside swings. So yeah, I don't. Again, I still think that those players are worth stashes as well. Like
Yep.
at current cost too, you're talking about late third, fourth round. If you're doing late rookie
Mhm.
drafts, it's still the same scenario, even though the draft capital didn't pan out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also, yes, the prospect profile is also the position. It's a lot easier for the running backs going in this range to find their way into fantasy relevance, especially for like a short 3-4 week stretch than it is for these other positions because it's much less talent
Correct.
driven at that point. It's really about who's in the right place at the right time. You can be in the right place at the right time. And if you're a bad wide receiver who can't get open, it doesn't matter. But if you're a running back in the right place at the right time, you just need the quarterback to hand you the ball. Like it just isn't that it's not as hard to find your way into some fantasy points that way. And these guys are incredibly cheap. I mean, they're very gettable. Um, so you can stash them if they fall into waivers and you have like roster clogging wide receivers or you have an empty spot, go ahead and pick them up. Like they're not dead yet. They still have the chance to latch onto these rosters or other rosters. So you can hold on to them. It's just probably not going to pan out. It looks like Deneric Prince was the UDFA we should have been picking all along.
Yeah.
He actually is pretty interesting. You should pick him up as well. He was not on my radar. I don't know if he was on anybody's radar before he started getting some buzz in the Chiefs camp, but he looks like he's very live to make the team. And he plays in a Patrick Mahomes offense. And we literally just saw a 7th round running back hit in that situation last
Exactly.
year. So go ahead and stash him too while you're at it. The last of these rookie running backs that I do want to get to is Kendre Miller, who we didn't touch on much as far as I remember, but he did sneak into day two. There were a good number of day two running backs, honestly, in this draft, more so than I thought there would be.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Kendre Miller was one of them. He goes to the Saints along with Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams. And everything's looked good for Kendre up until very recently. He did suffer a knee sprain. There's some optimism he'll be back for week one, but this is not a good development for a rookie. You know, these weeks leading up to the season are very important for establishing your role in the offense. So that is a little bit of a hit for him. Otherwise, it's been pretty positive news for Kendre. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, the knee injury is definitely a gigantic detriment to his quick development because it's such a crowded backfield already, and then potentially adding Kareem Hunt in the coming weeks as well. I don't really I didn't really love Kendra Miller as a prospect. That round 3 draft capital obviously rounds out what was a pretty middling but positive profile for a lot of reasons. There's the obvious, dysfunctions and inefficiencies at just
Mhm.
TCU's offense. But he's no stranger to also climbing a depth chart, supplanted Zach Evans, obviously, as we mentioned earlier. So it's definitely in him. He's got that dog where he
Yeah.
can even as the viewed as the number 2 guy can whittle away at the role and earn himself some value and some utility there. It's going to be tough sledding for his rookie season. And again, as we mentioned kind of at the top of the episode, you'd like to see linear production and good production, obviously, from rookie running backs because it's such a short window of production that we're talking about for their career arcs anyway. Like you're only really getting a running back at best, in generational talents like for 6 seasons, 7 seasons.
Yeah.
And obviously one of the reasons why the market is so askewed. But with that said, Kendrick can definitely carve out a role for himself, but it appears as if Jamal Williams has the role that would be available for him. And then Alvin Kamara, suspension for 3 games, but Kendrick Miller has never really profiled as a high upside pass catcher. They can
Mhm.
certainly use him in that role, but if the Kareem Hunt signing is to happen, then all of that potential upside goes out the window as well. So everything's kind of on the downswing for Kendrick Miller, to be honest.
Yeah, it definitely has been as of late, and it's especially a bummer because Alvin Kamara has that 3-game suspension. That would have been the prime time for him to really step in, get more work than usual, and make his mark, so to speak. Because he's actually coming into a similar situation that Kamara did, where there were 2 running backs ahead of him on the depth chart with Adrian
Right.
Peterson and Mark Ingram, but he was able to show how explosive he was, like basically right away. Then Peterson's gone. Um, that's probably not going to happen now with the knee injury and just him easing in more slowly. I think he has the potential to push his way into that rotation later in the year, but he's pretty unlikely to be like a significant contributor this year. Uh, Kamara is only going to be gone for 3 games. He's not the guy he used to be, but he's still the best pass catcher on the team. I expect he's still going to get a good amount of work. And then Jamal Williams, I mean, they went out of their way to bring him in. He's not the most efficient running back in the world, but he certainly is reliable. I guess you could say he figures to get that short yardage stuff, some of the goal line work, early down carries. So there's not really a clear opening for Kendra, like you said, and he isn't the most natural pass catcher. That wasn't really in his profile, and so if he's going to develop that, I don't expect that it's going to be this year on the field. It's going to be in practice, and maybe he can hit the ground running in year 2. With these 2 running backs ahead of him being older, guys that the Saints can get out of after this year, I believe that does position him for a nice little dynasty boost potentially. Like if we see the season end, maybe he has a couple of good games and then Alvin Kamara gets released or traded and Jamal Williams gets released. And it's like, oh, they're clearing the runway for Kendra Miller.
Yeah,
Maybe they just go and draft another running back, but you are going to have a window there where he kind of gets that Rashad White treatment. Like he's the guy. And maybe you can cash in on that. So that's sort of the what he has in his back pocket. Is just looks like things might open up for him in the future, but in the short term, it's not very exciting, and that does have to hurt his dynasty value because, like you said, these running backs, there's so little guaranteed for them, and they have such a short shelf life that any year a running back's not going to help you. That's a significant hit to their dynasty value.
exactly.
So that's the rookie running backs. I think that's pretty much all the relevant ones outside, like Bijan and Gibbs, who it's pretty
We know.
straightforward. You want them. They're really, really good. Tyjae
Yeah.
Spears, I guess, would be one more guy that we didn't really talk about. I didn't love his profile. I didn't like it very much at all, to be honest with you. But I didn't think he was going to go in round 3 either. So
No,
Now he finds himself. Sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I wasn't much of a fan in another guy that had like known medical concerns going into the draft, and the Titans essentially completely ignored them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're just like, hey, he's here for a good time, not a long time. I don't know. But he seems to have pushed his way into that backup role in Tennessee. There was obviously the legal stuff with Hassan Haskins, so I believe he's gone. Like he's gone. I think.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
His
So
NFL career
it's
is over.
yeah. That's what I thought. So it's really Spears is kind of a straight handcuff at this point. I guess. I mean, he's not going to get the Derrick Henry workload if Derrick
No,
Henry
he's
gets
not.
hurt,
Yeah.
but he could get like 60% of it, and that would be exciting for him. So I definitely think there's some interest there. He was a good value in rookie drafts. Like looking back on it, I faded him too hard. I think he was going in like the 303, 304 range, like right ahead of Zach Evans. And he had that third round draft capital. So I think he's a guy who maybe slipped through the cracks a little bit. And I am interested, tentatively optimistic that he could be useful in the first few years of his career. And unlike these other guys, just not that expensive.
Yeah, I think he's kind of the forgotten like day two running back. Where in the sense that, yeah, he's got the same draft capital. Obviously, the profile isn't as strong as some of these other guys, but he also has a incredibly high upside landing spot should the handcuff upside pay off.
Yeah, and that's never guaranteed, but again, it's about the bets you want to make at the right cost. I think he is a good cost bet in dynasty and in seasonal drafts as well. I've got a good amount of him in best ball. Um, Perfect. Love that. We're gonna move on now to some non-rookie stuff. We did talk obviously about preseason usage a little bit. We're just gonna hit on some other storylines from the preseason. Before we do that, Matt, can you just walk me through like how you handle the information overload of the preseason? Because we have like 6 months where we just build up all these priors, and then it's like we get 3 hours of football and we're like, okay, none of those matter. We're throwing them out the window. Obviously, Tank Bigsby played one short yardage snap. He is the short yardage back. He's going to
Yep.
score 33 touchdowns this year.
Yep.
So like how do we balance this like strong desire for like concrete information against what we know is like historically kind of an unreliable way of making judgments?
Honestly, like with a blind eye. Like this is one of the rare instances in dynasty, in my opinion, and fantasy football in general, for that matter, where ignorance truly is bliss. Like preseason should not change your rookie process. You shouldn't change your dynasty rankings, your overall evaluation of players on the market, save for like a few of these cheap upside stabs, like the Tajee Spears is the Elijah Dotsons or whoever else is breaking out in preseason, right? Like off the waiver wire guys that are likely going to become cut candidates by week 3. You stash Sean Tucker, you stash Zach Evans. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't cost you anything really. Like that's
Right.
really all that preseason information should be used for. And the preseason hype of players rarely leads to anything concrete in terms of changing a player's range of outcomes. But I guess there's always important information to accrue in terms of like depth charts, personnel percentages. Like we were talking about the Seahawks running a lot more 3 wide receiver sets, obviously, with the
Mhm.
acquisition of JSN, but talent is always going to win out as well. Think like Olabisi Johnson being ahead of Justin Jefferson, Marlon Mack being ahead of Jonathan Taylor on the depth chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bijan Robinson right now being ranked 3rd or 4th on the depth chart, whatever it is. Jamar Chase's drops, right? Like Anthony
Yeah.
Richardson not being named the starting quarterback, like things like that. They're all of that news and noise is largely entirely inconsequential.
Yeah. There are a ton of red herrings, obviously, we need to be aware of. And so I think for most people, I agree with you. It would be better to know nothing about the preseason than to try to synthesize all this information because you will make a lot
Right.
of wrong conclusions. My goal here is to kind of cut through the noise and find maybe a couple of things that could be predictive, or maybe they're not predictive, and we want to just suss that out now. We want to make sure that people are aware that this doesn't matter. So the first guy I want to touch on is Kenny Gainwell, member of my Philadelphia Eagles. He did not play in the preseason, week 1. Neither did Boston Scott, but Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift did. This immediately led to some, I think, pretty like irresponsible, or at least like lacking in context sort of opinions that are like, oh, Swift is or Gainwell's the starter, obviously, because he's
Yeah.
not playing. And it's like, okay, is Scott the co-starter or what? Because he didn't play either. Um, Gainwell has gotten positive buzz in camp from a lot of the beat reporters. Maybe he has a bigger role. The way that I see this personally is like Penny and Swift are new to the team. Gainwell and Scott are
Yep.
experienced. They know the scheme. Sirianni even came out and said Gainwell and Scott are going to play next week. He wants all these running backs to get tackled before week 1, as he said. I think Gainwell and Scott have defined roles in the offense that are not really changing from last year. And so, like, what do they need preseason for? Like, they just played 19 games together, went to the Super Bowl. Gainwell knows his deal. Like, he plays long down and distance, he plays 2-minute drill, and Scott is like the reserve, rusher, change of pace guy. That's kind of what I see. Do you think there's any more to it than that?
No, I absolutely agree, and basically quoting a lot of my notes word for word. And any hype surrounding Kenneth Gainwell is absolutely warranted because he doesn't get enough. Like I love
Yeah.
Kenny G, but as far as like assuming he's the starter or he's going to receive a monstrous opportunity share, I think we have a large enough sample size with who he is as a player, as a prospect, as everything that he's shown in the NFL. Season long sample sizes that's not necessarily going to happen. I think it genuinely is just getting a better look at what Swift and Penny can accompany and complement those roles with.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very skeptical that Kenny Gainwell has a real path to like an early down role where he's getting a lot of carries. I just don't really think that's his game. Like, I think he does some things well, and I think they'll continue to use him. And more than anything, I think he'll be a thorn in the side of whoever the running backs are that kind of have that Miles Sanders role. Ultimately, I think this is going to be a committee. I don't think, despite this being an incredible offense, I don't necessarily think that there's like league winning upside for any of the running backs in it. If anything, I'm just becoming a little bit more hesitant about Rashad Penny. And this is kind of echoing some thoughts I heard from the likes of like Jacob Sanderson, Davis Maddock in their podcasts over the past week. Basically, like, we haven't heard anything about Penny positive, really. He played into the second quarter of the preseason game. Swift played before him. Um, he's got very little guaranteed money. Like, if anything, the only conclusion I'm drawing is that nothing with Penny's role is set in stone. Like, he could be cut pre-week 1, he could be phased out. Like, there's not really a guarantee for him. And so I think his price in Dynasty was always pretty low. I think he was maybe a little too aggressively priced in seasonal drafts. But
Mm.
that's really my only takeaway here. It's just that Rashad Penny is not locked into anything, despite my thought that he's probably the best rusher on the team.
I mean, I would slightly disagree with a previous statement of league winning upside. I'm still very in on DeAndre Swift. You and I don't meet eye to eye on that one. And I think Swift is, for, you know, all intents and purposes at this point in his career, the better rusher when it comes to him and
Mhm.
Penny. But with that said, again, I do agree with the committee approach in that they're all kind of going to vulture each other's upside in that sense. And for those still stashing Kenneth Gainwell, like hand up, I'm guilty for doing so. I think it's kind of, at least if there is an open opportunity to pivot, it might be time to do so, because like they did bring in a guy with the same amount of draft capital that they spent on Kenny Gainwell this year in DeAndre Swift,
Yes,
right?
that's
So
true. I would be exploring any trade opportunities in Dynasty because I think if it's a best ball Dynasty league, go ahead and hold on to him if you want. But I think he's going to
right,
be a real headache in a managed
yeah,
league. Like, you're not going to know when to start him. I don't think he's going to have a high volume role. He will have big games, but you're not going to know when they will be. So that's a really tough situation. With running backs on my bench in a regular Dynasty league, like, I want players that I know when to start them. Like, okay, Miles Sanders gets hurt, I can play Chuba Hubbard, right?
right,
Or like Jeff Wilson, Raheem Mostert. We'll find out early in the season, like, if one of them has a role, we know who it is. I don't want guys where they have hypothetical points that like never get in my lineup, and I'm playing whack-a-mole trying to put Kenny Gainwell in the flex the right week. It's you're better off just re-rolling that into a second round pick where you can potentially get some other running back that gets drafted in the third round and maybe does hit in a more substantial
exactly,
kind of way. Yeah.
yep,
So, you're I think the third straight guest to disagree with me about DeAndre Swift. So I might have to
good,
change my tune a little bit. I am becoming a little more optimistic just based on like his deployment in the preseason. Like, he's ahead of Penny, it looks like. Um, I've my whole case with Swift is like he's definitely talented. I feel like the priors were being like clung to a little bit too hard for a guy who's like been marginalized by Jamal Williams and then traded for a day 3 pick. Like, but the price is becoming more and more palatable every day, and there is some upside. Definitely don't think I don't think he has top 5 running back upside, and like, obviously this is um, splitting hairs, I guess, like where we define, what upside really is significant
Right.
for his price. But I just don't foresee the offense changing enough to accommodate his pass catching strengths. Like I just don't see a world where he gets 90 targets. I just don't think that's feasible in this offense the way it's constructed. I don't think it's going to change that much. Just it's going to change some because Sanders was such a bad pass catcher and Swift is better. But I just don't know if it's going to change enough to accommodate that type of a ceiling from him.
That's fair.
But he doesn't need that type of ceiling to pay off at his price. So that really isn't, relevant to the discussion. Um, the next guy here is another running back. I promise we'll talk about at least one non-running back today, but we do have another running back. That's Khalil Herbert of the Chicago Bears. He caught a pass, which is not something he's been known to do. And he caught it on a third down, no less. And then he took it for a touchdown. So, I mean, all good things. The thing about Khalil Herbert is he's a very good rusher. He was one of the most efficient runners in the NFL last year. Actually,
Yeah.
it's really funny to see the
And the year
difference
before.
between the like the casual NFL fans and like the true fantasy degenerates, because you'll talk about Khalil Herbert having all this talent, and then people will be like, "Who is that?" Like who's Khalil Herbert? Or like he's bad. He's not bad. He's very good. He's kind of like Tony Pollard, but without the receiving. Like he's like very an under the radar great player, but the team brought in Deontay Foreman. They drafted Roshan Johnson in the early fourth round. So it's like unclear how the backfield's going to shake out. First preseason game, he got like all of the starter reps. He didn't leave the field. Like I said, caught a pass. So I guess my question is like, do you think there's a chance that he has some kind of every down role this year?
Yeah, my answer would be yes. I absolutely do. And I've been above consensus on Khalil Herbert since before anybody knew who he was. Like, genuinely, I thought he was a better prospect than I was given credit for by the NFL draft.
Right.
But he's kind of shown it. Like, I think Pollard's a good example, maybe a poor man Pollard, but an Elijah Mitchell, Alexander Madison are kind of two really good examples as well, because Herbert's played 30 games in 2 seasons. He's had 60% of the snaps in just 5 of those games. Obviously, a pretty small sample size to be considered a lead back over 60% of the snaps. All of those games obviously coming as well in games in which David Montgomery was hurt. In those 5 games, though, averaged 17.6 PPR points per game. And then he's played over 50% of the snaps in 8 of his career 30 games. And in those 8 games, averages 15.4 points PPR points per game. So anytime that Herbert has been given any sort of, whether it be committee split or lead back role, he's been incredibly valuable for weekly production, much like Alexander Madison, Elijah Mitchell.
Yeah, I love him too. I had to double check just there when you were talking. My exposure on Underdog. He is my second most drafted running back. I've got
I think that's a smart decision.
22% Khalil Herbert. So I'm pretty happy about that. I do have some dynasty bags as well, of course. He's very affordable in dynasty, like RB 40 range right there in the 12th round. So he's a bet I want to make. Like it's a talent bet. I think he's more likely than not. Or I should say that the other way. He's less likely to get that full blown every down role. Like based on the years of data that we have, I'm not
Sure,
willing to
yeah.
throw all of that out for the one preseason play. Like in most universes, I don't think he's going to get a lot of receiving work. I don't think he's going to turn into Christian McCaffrey overnight. But if he can add a little bit of that to his game, get up in that kind of 2 receptions per game range with the ability he has as a rusher and the rushing lanes that Justin Fields is going to open in that offense, I think there is exciting upside there. Again, doesn't have to be league winning. Like he's not expensive. If you get a high end RB2 season out of Khalil Herbert, low end RB1 season, that's a massive win at his price. And
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
yeah,
If you get a RB2 season out of him in any
yeah,
range, it's a massive win at his price. And I think that's essentially his ceiling of output in a committee that he leads. Yes, it still has to be a committee that he wins out, right? A 55, 58, 60% snap share total with an opportunity to share roughly around that 58 to 62% range as well, which you see productive backs in committees, be very useful with an opportunity share like that.
yes, I think you're right about that being kind of his projectable ceiling. short of everything going right and Roshan Johnson being abducted by aliens or something. Like that's probably the ceiling. Now, I don't dislike Roshan Johnson. Like you don't have to pick a guy, maybe on one team you have to pick a guy, but like overall you're allowed to like two backs in the same backfield. Like I think there's a case for Roshan as well. It just doesn't involve Herbert being amazing. Like it's a separate case. But
Yeah, they're
Roshan,
not mutually exclusive.
exactly. It's like Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne. I like both of them as well. I think they both are priced in a range that I like. So I draft both of them, just not on the same team. But I like Roshan in the sense that he is a complete player. Like he didn't have a ton of work in college because of Bijan Robinson. You
Bijan.
may have heard of him. But he did have all of those abilities that we like. He's supposed to be a good pass blocker. He's supposed to be a good pass catcher. He had a nice play in the preseason too. While once Khalil Herbert was sitting down on the bench having a Gatorade, he already did his thing. Roshan did get to play and he broke off a nice big run. So he's interesting in his own right. And if Khalil Herbert were to fail for some reason or get hurt, that's exciting as well. But Herbert is the guy that's familiar with the offense. He hasn't done anything as a rusher to suggest he's going to get less work than he has in the past. And his competition is now lessened. So I would project his role to grow, not decrease, with David Montgomery exiting. So I do like that. I think it's a good signal for him. I think he deserves to move up a little bit just based on him getting all these starter snaps. We weren't sure what the split was going to look like. Maybe Deontay Foreman would have an equal role. Doesn't look like that's the case. And so I think it's all wheels up for Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, I agree. I think you should just follow the ADPs in this backfield. So like Herbert, Johnson, Foreman in that order. Production and value should also coincide in that order, as
Mhm.
any semblance of positive production from Johnson is going to raise his value, whereas no amount of positive production from Foreman could affect how low and stagnant his current cost is. And obviously Herbert being the highest valued of them all, just at a slight above Roshan Johnson, I think is fair to assume that he outproduces and also holds more dynasty value.
Yep, I agree with you there. We are going to close the show out talking about Greg Dulcich, who's been one of my favorite guys. Before we do that, was there anything else you wanted to call out from this preseason week one? I know, like you said, you're kind of plugging your ears, like you don't want to fall victim to the bad narratives. Is there anything that did stick out to you that you'd like to touch on here?
Yeah, I'm gonna rapid fire through them. I'll just rifle them off because like there's quite a few things that have kind of stood out, but again, it's more noise than news. But Russell
Right.
Wilson looked like garbage. I think Trey Lance is proving why it's Brock Purdy's job to lose and not his to win. A.T. Perry is also a lot larger than I remembered. Interceptions for rookie quarterbacks don't matter until week one. Jordan Addison is definitely for real. And I had no idea who Emmanuel Wilson and Elijah Dotson were, but they are given seminars on how to make an NFL roster right now.
That's some good stuff. If you missed any of that, go ahead and just hit that little button on your podcast app. Back 15 seconds. Listen to that again. A.T. Perry is a rookie wide receiver for the Saints. Did he get drafted? When did he get drafted?
Yeah. I think late sixth actually, but like he is a legit 6'5", 210.
That's pretty intimidating. I know Rashid Shaheed's missing some time, and so there's kind of an opening there for him. We know Michael Thomas loves to miss time. So definitely some potential for Perry. Sounds like a nice little late stash you could grab there. Um, yeah, Jordan Addison is a guy I've been drafting like crazy on Underdog. Obviously, my rookie drafts were months ago because I'm a sicko. But I've been trying to get him. Like I got him in a dynasty auction I did a couple weeks ago, which I felt great about. But I have not gotten enough of him. I think he is a very safe bet to gain value this season because he's such a solid player. He's going to run a million routes. He's in a very stable offensive environment. Like everything is lining up for Addison to just ho hum, 950 yards, pick up 2 rounds of dynasty startup ADP, and just be in that like T Higgins zone by next year. Like I genuinely think that that's like a likely outcome for him. So somebody I'm looking to trade for before week one. Yeah. All right, cool. We'll move on to my last guy here. Like I said, Greg Dulcich. There was a little bit of a development with Greg Dulcich. So basically, I've been all in on him since his rookie season. Even before the end of his rookie season, I was like, this dude is for real. Like he looks awesome. Came in as a 3rd-round pick for the Broncos immediately. Well, not immediately. He was hurt, but as soon as he got on the field, first game back, I think he had like 2 nice long catches, had a touchdown, and then it was just like 9 straight weeks of like very strong tight end play. Averaged the 5th most yards per game for a rookie tight end since the year 2000. That's a list with like Jeremy Shockey, Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, and a fifth name that escapes me. Good company. So, like, I have a lot of exposure to Dulcich in Dynasty, in seasonal. Um, but what happened is Adam Troutman played a whole bunch of snaps ahead of Greg Dulcich, especially in like on 11 personnel. He was actually on the field sometimes instead of Dulcich, which is concerning. But we need to remember a couple of things. And then I'd love to hear your take. Adam Troutman never did a thing in New Orleans. So whether Sean Payton likes him or not, he never did anything on the Saints. He's bad. Okay. He's a blocker. He's not a receiver. That's going to be his role. Number two, I already said this. Dulcich had a great rookie season, but I've seen some people try to compare it now to Alberto because they wear the same uniform. That's revisionist history. Like, Alberto did not come close to Greg Dulcich's rookie season. Even in his second season, which is the one that actually got his ADP boosted, he wasn't as good as Greg Dulcich was as a rookie. So not comparable, different draft capital, different production profiles, different rookie production, like not similar at all. Third thing, we do know that Sean Payton has a little bit of a history of pass catching tight ends. Jimmy Graham was not exactly known for his blocking prowess. He still scored plenty of fantasy points. I know you're a Saints fan, Matt. Maybe you can speak to that. Other ways that Payton has used tight ends. But where do you see Dulcich? Like, are you moving him at all based on this preseason game?
Yeah, this is one of those like blind eye preseason things for sure. And although Peyton's affinity for Troutman has been duly noted by the beats, like all offseason, really, again, he's shown no utility as a pass catcher in his 3-year career. He is a blocking specialist out of a very small school as well. And Dulcich is a historically elite rookie tight end. 12.5 yards per reception, 1.44 yards per route, 1.21 yards per team pass attempt, 70% route participation. I mean, over 70% route participation because he had 84.1%. But there's only been 5 rookie tight ends to post a 70% route participation ever. So, and did so with a 17.2 rather percent target share on a 10.6 yard ADOT. Like, everything about Greg Dulcich's rookie profile, who again, rookies do not historically perform that well at all at the tight end position, is positive for his year 2 outcomes. And although Sean Payton might feel a little less high on him as we do, and I don't think it's necessarily the same scenario as the Eagles, where like Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell aren't necessarily getting playing time because they're used to the offense. Like Sean Payton, nobody's used to the offense.
Right.
But I do think it's also like he knows that Greg Dulcich is a good pass catcher, where Adam Troutman still needs preseason snaps. Like, I think you can spin that narrative as equally as you could spin the fact that Greg Dulcich is being snuffed on the depth chart. Like, I genuinely think it could be like one of these guys actually needs to be playing in the preseason.
Right. To steal a term from one of your tweets earlier today, it's kind of a Rorschach test where you can kind of see what you want to see in it. And so for me, it's like I'm buying any dip that there is on Greg Dulcich. I want to buy into the talent. I don't think Sean Payton is a stupid coach. I think he will play the good players, the ones that are going to help him win games. Dulcich is a good player. That is not really up for debate for me. Whether he can improve as a blocker or not is sort of beside the point for his fantasy output. So I'm still in. I'm not really very worried about Adam Troutman. And you look at what's actually happened. Like, there's been positive reports, first of all, about Greg Dulcich. Sean Payton specifically has spoken highly of him. We lost Tim Patrick for the season. We lost KJ Hamler, right? Like, this is Judy, Sutton, and Marvin Mims are really the pass catchers outside of Dulcich. Mims is a rookie. He didn't even play the first preseason game. I don't know why. There's nothing guaranteed for him. Sutton has been pretty uninspiring since he tore his ACL. Like, there is an opening here to be the second target in a Russell Wilson offense. Absolutely. In a Sean Payton offense. I think there's just so much potential here, and I'm not scared off by Adam Troutman and his blocking snaps in preseason week 1.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as long as we continue to see that route participation kick around 85%, like, Greg Dulcich is going to be incredibly useful, and both in real life football and obviously as a dynasty asset. And I think like that kind of falls into that weird range of tight end 10 to tight end 12 as far as dynasty assets are concerned, right? You could almost slot anybody in there, the Isaiah Likeleys, the Chigakonkwo's, but I do think that Greg Dulcich has equal to more upside as anybody ahead of him should he earn a continual starter role. Like, he could be Dallas Goedert. He could be a George Kittle. He could definitely put up tight end 1 seasons in his career.
Oh, absolutely. He's by far my favorite bet out of any of the guys on the board
Yes.
there. I'm firmly Dulcich over Chig. I would take Dulcich over Evan Ingram, who is going ahead of him, a full round ahead of him now post
Njoku is
extension.
in that range as well, right?
Yeah,
Like,
like I'm very in on him and his potential. Like I would not be surprised at all if he was a top 5 tight end in Dynasty by
yeah,
December
that's okay.
because
And it's not a hard gap to leap because just think of some of those names, right? Like Chigakonkwo was for every reason less productive and less exciting and less sticky than Greg Dulcich it was as a rookie, but currently valued ahead of him.
yeah, exactly. It's not that hard for tight ends to make a leap like that as soon as they show themselves useful. But you have Kittle turning 30. You have obviously Kelsey is, teetering on the edge of the nursing home, age 34. We have Hawkinson, who, I think his production last year is a little bit fraudulent. I think Dulcich could turn out to be an incredibly similar type of producer, if you put him in the right offensive situation. So I definitely think there's an opening there for him to be a big riser, and that's why I'm still buying in. Like any kind of floor case just isn't going to sway me because at tight end there are so few home run potential picks, and he is one of them in my mind.
Absolutely.
Yep. So that's gonna do it for us here in the main show. We are gonna record a little bonus segment that's gonna be dropping on YouTube. So if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can go head over there to catch that. But otherwise, this has been an awesome show with Matt. It's been great having you here back again. I know you've been very busy, so I appreciate you carving out the time to jump on the mic with me. Do you have any final thoughts for the people before we close this one out?
Oh man, just give me a follow on Twitter. Make sure you follow Paul and all the guys over at DFF. Come check us out. It's a bunch of great content dropping from those folks all the time.
Obviously, love that shout. You can follow Matt at PsychWardFF. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. And yeah, jump on over to DFF. It's the best time of year to go ahead and grab that annual membership because there's going to be in-season articles every week. Your buy sells, you got your waiver column, you got your dynasty angle on everything. Obviously, I'll be doing this show every week. Hopefully, dropping some other content as well. So yeah, it's a good time. The season's coming up. It's exciting. It's busy. But I will be here with you guys next week on the factory tour.